We'll go ahead and get started. I want to thank everyone for coming on. We know it's been a long day. We're not going to take up too much more of your time, but we certainly hope that what we have to share tonight is useful and helpful. I know many of you on the call, but some I don't. So allow me to introduce myself. I'm Matt Wagner. I'm the Vice President of Institutional Relationships at United Church Funds. I've had the opportunity to work with many of you on this call, and my colleagues, Charles Buck, Matthew Ilian, and Stacy Pettis are with me as well. We're going to be talking tonight about how we're helping, how sort of the experience that we've had in working with 1,100 churches and organizations all over the country. We'd like to be able to share some of our experience and best practices about ways that we've been able to help churches navigate these very challenging times in 2020, and certainly will continue into 2021. Our hope is that we can pass along some of the best practices to you that we've been able to share with congregations so that you can then share that with your constituent churches. I will warn you in advance that the presentation that we're going to share is a little bit intentionally text heavy. It has a lot of slides, but we're going to move through them fairly quickly and hopefully leave time for discussion at the end. We're just going to hit on some of the high level topics. But the reason we left a lot of the material in the presentation itself is that this will be available as a recording and also as a leave behind PDF that we're happy to share with you after the call. So sort of intentionally a little bit of a deep dive presentation so that it has all the material that you'll need to pass on, and obviously we're happy to help you with questions as folks have them as well afterwards. So with that, I would like to pass it over to our president and CEO, Charles Buck, for some words of welcome. And I'm gonna, at this point, share my screen.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Matt. And I just want to be sure, Debbie, can you send, I think it's to Ellie Chung, she's asking for the password to the Zoom session. So I want to say welcome to everybody. And you know, as Matt said, we realize that you're probably zoomed out. It's been a long day already. And it's just the first day. So we don't want it. We're not going to try to exhaust you here. That's not the idea. We just wanted to say, number one, welcome. Number two, thank you. I mean, really, for me personally, thank you. Especially those of you doing conference ministry. Oh my gosh, I understand what it's like. What a year it's been. You've done an incredible job. I've been watching, and I am just impressed at the way that you've hung in there, you've supported, and you know, I used to do conference ministry, obviously, and all I can say is I'm glad I'm not doing it now because it's so hard. Yet at the same time, the third thing I want to say is that I love the ministry I'm doing because it really is, in a lot of ways, like conference ministry in the sense that we support churches, we support people, we support ministries. And that's what we really feel here at United Church Funds, that our mission is to support your mission, essentially. It's to help you by generating competitive values-aligned performance with your investments and endowments. And it isn't about the money. Our vision is that investment creates a just world for all. We harness the power of investment to create a just world for all. So that's why, you know, we're all in this together, and more specifically for all of you doing conference ministry, we want to help you as you help your own, well, the conference, the churches, your ministries within the conference to be able, again, to help accomplish the mission through competitive values aligned performance. Just the second bullet I'd like you to take a look at. United Church Funds lives its mission and vision by using the power of ownership to affect positive change, because we believe that a responsibly managed company makes a better long-term investment. It isn't just about good performance, it really is about doing good, because we really do believe the bottom line is affected by those that are responsibly investing. And so I do just want to mention Matthew Ilian is with us. I'm so glad he is. He's our Director of Responsible Investing. He's been with us for all of about 5 months now. But you know, Matthew is not from the UCC originally, but he's just the right person. I don't know if he's fallen in love with the UCC, but he certainly reflects, you know, in his own way of being, a lot of the ethos and a lot of the values of the United Church of Christ, as you'll see when he shares later. So why don't we go on? I'll stop here, and Matt, I'll turn it over back to you.
Okay. Thanks, Charles. Appreciate it. And we're going to spend a little bit of time introducing our other colleagues on the call as we kind of come up on their sections of the presentation. So what we're going to focus on tonight are three critical themes of what we believe for churches in 2021 and beyond as it relates to COVID and other factors. So prudently managing the assets that you have and what it means to be a fiduciary in 2020. We're going to speak a little bit about policies, about what it means to be a fiduciary, and making sure that our folks in churches understand that they are fiduciaries and they have an important responsibility to manage assets for their church. We want to talk a little bit about growing endowments, and I've asked my colleague Stacy Pettis to be with us here tonight to talk about growing your endowments through planned giving. Planned giving is a part of a culture of stewardship that can't stop just because of a lot of market uncertainty. We have to keep promoting planned giving and legacy gifts. And then finally, Matthew Illian's going to speak about making a difference through the dollars that we're able to invest in open markets, and how UCF is specifically doing that for our clients. So in a time when markets are volatile, our clients know at 100% of the time that those dollars are still doing good work. And then, as I mentioned before, we're going to leave some time for Q&A and hopefully hold those questions as you have them, and feel free to share towards the end. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about some of the fiduciary issues that we've seen clients face over the course of the last few months, and even before that, clearly, but just really focusing on since March, since the pandemic. So an investment fiduciary, someone who's managing the assets of another person and stands in that special relationship of trust and confidence. 80% of all institutional assets are managed by someone with fiduciary responsibility, and any asset that's managed on behalf of a church or a conference that has a finance committee or an investment committee or an endowment committee, all those folks, generally speaking, are fiduciaries. United Church Funds also holds ourselves out to be a fiduciary as well. There's about 5 million total investment fiduciaries in the US, and they fall into three broad categories. Investment stewards, so those are trustee and investment committee members, those folks in churches that are mostly untrained, and many of them are unaware of their fiduciary responsibilities. There are then folks, investment advisors. So those are your prudent experts, so to speak, that give you continuous advice and work alongside those stewards to make sure that they understand their responsibilities. Unfortunately, many of them are also not trained. And so then we fall lastly to investment managers. United Church Funds sort of acts in two capacities for our clients. Investment managers, so we actually have discretion over the portfolios. And then we also help to advise and lean on our clients to move them one way or another based on best practices for managing their endowments. When we're talking about UPMIFA, David, you can turn off your screen for this. Pennsylvania is the only state that has not adopted the Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act, adopted by 49 states between 2006 and 2012. Generally speaking, sets the rules of the road for how we're going to manage endowments. David, I know your folks in Penn West also probably need to follow these best practices and procedures, although that law, again, does not apply necessarily to folks in Pennsylvania. And it established basically what we refer to United Church Funds as the total return approach to distributions, which we'll talk about here in a moment. So when fiduciary conduct and UPMIFA sort of cross paths, we're really talking about the duty of loyalty. So those investment stewards that are members of the church that have been appointed or voted on to be a part of an investment committee or an endowment committee, they have a duty to act solely for the organization's benefit. They should also, as a best practice, delegate the responsibility of investment management, that is making investment decisions on what stocks to buy or what bonds to sell or at any given time, to those prudent experts, the advisors and managers. And then there's also some best practices around fees and portfolio oversight, as you see there. Long story short, it's important for those, many of which, again, are untrained fiduciaries within the local churches, to be able to delegate that delegate the duties. They don't delegate the responsibility, but they do delegate the duties to other folks who have expertise in and around managing institutional assets. This slide is important. It comes from an organization called FI 360, which is an organization that I've been involved with for the last, probably 7 years or more. They're the leading voice on fiduciary matters, both for nonprofit organizations as well as ERISA plans, which also fall under an important fiduciary responsibility. You can see there what they call the 7 precepts of fiduciary excellence. We've touched on most of them except for number 7, which is conflicts of interest. Oftentimes we'll see in churches where Joe the broker has the account for the church and he's doing it quote unquote for free or at cost and not charging them a commission or an advisory fee. That actually tends to be a conflict of interest most of the time, especially when that person sits on the committee. And so what we subscribe or what we ask the churches do is to think about using an outside party, whether it's United Church Funds or anyone else, but to use a party to that prudent expert party should be not affiliated with their church, not a member of their church, but someone who has that outside expertise. To the components of an endowment policy statement. And again, this is the part where I mentioned before, where we have a lot of slides and we're just going to hit the high points. The way that I would like for folks to think about an endowment policy statement is actually not only as a statement of policy about how you're going to manage the assets, but also how you're going to communicate the values of your church and what you're trying to accomplish to potential donors. Jenny Brown Daniel and I worked on a similar process to this with the Missouri Mid-South Conference. And so I'm going to talk both about how this impacts local churches and also how it could impact your conference or association, and the fact that it's really important to have good policy documents at both levels. Of course, we have the types of funds that are governed by policies, temporarily and permanently restricted and unrestricted. I'm sure probably everyone, generally speaking, knows those principles, but it's important to make sure that your policy reaches out to both sides of that equation, particularly when there are restrictions that are either permanent or temporary. We need to make sure that we understand and articulate those. So the first section of an endowment policy statement, and endowment, of course, is a term that we sort of use loosely, but generally any long-term pool of assets that's for the benefit of the organization, we can generally cover under a policy such as this. But we need to have a sort of a governance piece. Who are the people that are going to serve on the committee? What's the committee going to be called? Are they appointed for life, like 90% of churches, or are they actually going to serve a particular term? We of course prefer that they serve, maybe that 3 or 4 year term and then cycle off the committee. What are the types of skill sets that you're looking for in folks to serve on these committees? And this is true both at the conference level and church level. You want to have a diverse group on your investment committee. They don't all need to be investment professionals. They don't all need to be accountants. They can come from various investment committees, can come from various walks of life. The main thing that they need to share is that understanding of fiduciary responsibility and a love for the mission and ministry that the funds support. And if they can agree on those 2 principles, they generally speaking make excellent investment committee members. And I would also note that as it relates to the training of folks that decide to sit on these committees, both for your conferences as well as churches, United Church Funds is willing to sit down and help train those folks and help get them sort of acclimated to the things they need to be doing as a fiduciary. The second part of a policy, and a very important part, is the gift acceptance policy. We actually touched base on this earlier today in a call or in one of the breakout sessions as it related to church closure. As it relates to conferences, there will most likely be a trend where churches and other organizations that are somehow affiliated with your conference are going to want to leave the conference assets. And we, as on behalf of United Church Funds and as your trusted partners on the advisory space, we want to make sure that you're prepared to accept those assets in a manner that is, acceptable, appropriate, efficient for the conference itself. One of those strategies is called the bucket strategy, and I'd be happy to define that just a little bit further, not to get too much into the weeds, but to create different buckets of core missions and ministries that your conference or a local church is going to always support, and to actually articulate those into your policy so that donors understand that when they choose to leave a gift to that church, or when a church chooses to leave a gift to the conference, if they close or merge with another congregation, they can actually select one of those pre-selected buckets as an opportunity to support specific missions and ministries of the conference or of the church. I'd be happy to talk about that further, but certainly one of the best practices that we've seen. What ends up happening sometimes if you don't have a well-written gift acceptance policy is that a church or a conference will accept a gift that is then a little bit of an anchor around your neck, a large building that's difficult to liquidate. I always use the example of never wanting to for example, accept the gift of a gas station because there's too many environmental issues that go along with that. So you can play that out in various scenarios, but long story short, the gift acceptance policy is exceptionally important, both at the conference level and the church level. The third section is the investment policy. It's the part we talk about the most, but to be fair, it's probably the easiest part to come to. The investment policy just lays out the rules of the road by which we're going to invest the assets, how much of your portfolio in stocks, how much in bonds, what funds we're going to use. United Church Funds is your partner in helping you walk through that process of developing a diversified strategy that's going to provide you with consistent and appropriate returns, consistent returns at appropriate risk levels over time. We're happy to have those conversations with any church. Some churches during these times, because they're scared of what the market could do, they actually leave their investment policy behind and become ultra conservative. To be fair, that has not worked in 2020. If you took your money out of the market in March or April because you were scared and missed the market rebound over the course of the last 7 months or 6 months, your returns are going to be disappointing versus the S&P 500 or other indexes. So we want to make sure that we work with churches to understand that investment policies are really important, and they're also not only important, but it prevents sort of the Monday morning quarterback from future generations to say, gosh, these folks really made a mistake here. If you follow the policy, that shouldn't happen. I would also note just on this slide briefly, we talk about this in the context of an investment policy, but any investment decisions, meeting minutes, details of discussions, et cetera, should always be kept in what we refer to as the fiduciary file. It's an important document. It could just put it on your desktop, but that's an important place where you can go back year after year after year and identify decisions that were made as it relates to the portfolio. And then finally, the last section of an endowment policy statement is, of course, the distribution policy. We don't really use the word spending because nobody in churches likes to spend money, but they do like to distribute money to make sure that we're funding mission and ministry. And so what we use a distribution policy to do is to set the baseline for how mission and ministry is going to be funded. We need to have a distribution policy that, of course, protects the endowment, but also helps sort of set the rules, sort of set the guidelines, if you will, for how investments are going to be spent over time. The total return method I mentioned before, this sort of assumes no restrictions here, but a prudent distribution percentage, and I wouldn't necessarily call this a best practice, but certainly something that's prudent. We're seeing churches take out 3.5% to 5% of the total value of an account. And that 3.5% to 5% is based on some sort of rolling average. It's appropriate not to rely solely on just capital gains or income because that fluctuates. What this allows a church or a conference to do is to set up a pretty standard way to generate funding for mission and ministry. We don't think about it as income. We don't think about it as gains. But we have to be aware of excessive withdrawals. This is something that we haven't necessarily seen too much at United Church Funds yet, but we believe that over the next 6 months, if we continue to, worship remotely and perhaps, giving continues to falter in some churches, that we could see some excessive withdrawals. And when you have, even decent returns, but you have excessive withdrawals against those returns, over the course of time, that really can impact the value of your portfolio. So for example, if you have a draw that is 2% more than your net return, over a 10-year period, it'll deplete your fund by 20% and over 20 years by 35%. Just 2%. So if we return 5, but you spend 7, we're going to be able to point to a date on the calendar where that church or conference is going to run out of money. You can see a 3% draw versus a net return. Over 20 years, we'll take about half of the value of your funds out. And that doesn't matter how large or small the account is. But if you did that consistently over time, we certainly wouldn't think that a church would do that. But that gives you the impact of just that 3% draw and that 2% draw versus your net return. One success story I'll share with you before we transition to plain giving. We've got a church out in the Seattle area that works with us, that invested assets with us, about $3 million, in fact, from the sale of real estate back at the end of 2015. And over the course of time, over the last few years, we've met with them quarterly, and they've taken 1% of the assets out of their portfolio every quarter, 1% per quarter, rain or shine, good quarter, bad quarter. they've taken those assets out. That fund right now sits at about $3.4 million total, and they've taken out over $800,000 in return in distributions to fund their mission and ministry over that period of time, over that 4.5 years or so. So the total return process works when you're not taking excessive withdrawals and when you stick to your process of taking returns out on a very regular basis, sort of that rain or shine. And I'll be happy to share more success stories as well with you. So with that, I'm going to turn it to my colleague, Stacy Pettis. Stacy's our executive for institutional relationships. She resides in Brooklyn, and we work very closely together. Thank goodness the communication lines are strong between St. Louis and Brooklyn, because we're on the phone all the time visiting with our clients. So Stacy is going to talk a little bit about Plan Giving. So take it away.
Great, thank you. Thank you all again for being here with us. I'm not sure if everyone on this call is familiar, but United Church Funds is the administers the Plan Giving program of the UCC. And so we are happy to work with any of churches or conferences as it relates to how what kind of gifts that members can give and how we can get things set up for you. So what is a plan gift, right? A plan gift is actually transfer of assets that have a charitable benefit. And then they also are impactful to the financial planning or estate planning of a donor. And there are a couple of ways that gifts can be given. So one is by deferring a gift. And in these examples, gifts are placed with an impact that is not fully realized until a future date. Usually this is after the death of the donor. And then there's also life income gifts. And life income gifts are irrevocable transfers of assets where donors receive income for themselves or their designee. They have favorable tax treatment, and also the assets provide support for a charity of their choice. So just keep in mind that there are two ways that people can give. So sometimes we think that we have to wait all the way until a donor's death, but there are ways that they can give during life and receive benefits as well. Matt, you can flip over. Okay, thank you. So benefits to the church, right? So a plan giving program in a local congregation is based on the same theology of stewardship that applies to individuals. So for a church, having a plan giving ministry enables you to continue your mission and ministry over the long term, right? So we're thinking way beyond the time span that we'll be at the church. So how does the longevity get to look for this church? It also allows for opportunities to educate our members on what stewardship looks like and how they can actively be participants in that. It also provides an opportunity to stimulate the financial planning of the church, to think about future projects and initiatives and missions that the church wants to be a part of. And you'll be able to make some of the framework of those plans when you know the gifts that are to be expected in the future. It also can be used to fund the endowment of the church. And Matt mentioned some really key elements of having an endowment and managing that properly and having policies in place. And it also lays the groundwork for recognition and creating a legacy society that people can be proud to be a part of. And there really isn't too much responsibility as it relates to what the church would need to do: promote the gift opportunities, thank donors when they do choose to give, and keep records of those gifts and how the donors wanted those funds to be allocated or designated. So of course, there are benefits to the donor. As I mentioned, there are some favorable tax treatments for sure. So it's important that they know what those are and are working with their own personal tax accountants. It also helps support them in being good stewards and really giving to God, right? It also supports the mission of the church, which they would be proud to be a part of. And they get to work with us as experts in investment management to ensure that those funds are properly designated and managed. And then there's just a little bit of text around how life income gifts will work, and we'll provide that for your reference. And so if we broke it down in really simple terms, 5 steps of building a planned giving program, really crafting and making the case for why this is important and why this is essential to the life of the church. Choosing your leaders wisely, and also educating and equipping them to lead a planned giving initiative or campaign at the church. Also building the policies and infrastructure that are needed so that the gifts can be used in the ways that the church could really find the most value. And listen to your members, know who your prospects are, know who those potential donors are and their ability to give, and then continue to cultivate and educate. Sometimes our congregants don't even know that these opportunities exist and why they should be giving. So it's important for us to communicate that and to do that all throughout the year. And so as I wrap this part of planned giving to a close, I have the opportunity to introduce you to one of our newest members of our staff, Matthew Illian, our Director of Responsible Investing. Take it away, Matthew.
Thank you, Stacy, and it's great to be here with you all. And I just want to say it really is an honor to do this work. And the reason I feel that is because I get to speak to corporations every week about the values that the UCC and UCF clients hold. I don't take that lightly, but it is so needed in the, just in the economy to have voices like the UCCs. And we work with many partners across different faith denominations and different faiths to speak to those values. So the UCC has been doing this work of Sorry, I accidentally muted there. I was going to say that we've been doing this work for over 50 years. And this chart that we have in front of you looks at just the last 25 years or so that the US Sustainable Investment Forum has been measuring activity in sustainable investing. And every 2 years, they take a new assessment. And when they first took this assessment, it was 1 in $25 under professional management had some kind of sustainable investing mandate. And today, this says 1 in every $4. A new update just came out. It's now 1 in every $3 under professional management is ESG or has a sustainable mandate. So this has become a huge part of the financial ecosystem. And I would just say we were doing it in UCF, UCC before it was cool. But we're very happy to see all the big kind of institutional players get involved. At the same time, their involvement isn't as deep as we'd like. And on this chart, I'm just going to reference the orange and the gray part of this pie chart to say that's where the deep engagement is happening. So Matt, if you'll go to the next slide, but the blue, most of it is just kind of how saying, hey, we're going to pick ESG type investments. The orange and gray deeper engagement. So if you look on the left side, to kind of help you understand the depth that we think of when we think of responsible investing, we put these 5 tools together. So this is the responsible investor toolbox. This first tool is designing portfolios with sustainable metrics in mind. And that's where we've seen most of the growth in that chart that you just saw. And this next tool is investing in impact first ventures. So that would be, examples of that would be the work that we're doing to invest in green bonds, which help support solar installations, or investments in social bonds, which helps nonprofits grow their efforts in communities. And there are lots of other examples of impact first ventures. These next 2 tools, I'm going to not talk about much now because they're in the next slide, but these are some of where we see the deepest engagement and the work that we really lean into heavily. And then lastly is the tool of divestment. And we put it last for a reason. We believe that should really be a last resort. And our goal and our hope is that we can encourage and nudge corporations to be more courageous. But there are just cases in terms of the human rights, or cases in terms of the industries that some of these companies aren't, where we're just not going to find alignment. And we do have and have cultivated over many years a kind of a rigorous exclusionary investment policy that avoids investments in some of those companies and those sectors. Military arms would be an example of one of those sectors that doesn't align with the Just Peace Church that the UCC is committed to. Matt, if you'll go to the next slide. On our website, we've got a 50-year history of the UCC's discernment around responsible investing. You'll see it, it's more than 50 years. It goes back to 1967. You'll see the work that we've done when the UCC decided to join other faith institutions in divesting from South Africa during apartheid. You'll see on here the commitment that UCC made to be the first faith organization to support a fossil fuel-free funds, as well as many other important moments on this timeline that we just want to highlight, and we will be highlighting again in our annual report. Next slide, Matt. This is an example of the work that we're doing around racial equity is obviously a huge focus in the season that we're living through, as the consciousness grows that the systems and the way that people have been treated, minorities have been treated, has been inequitable for too long. And so we are working with a group called As You Sow, is one of our initiatives to, they've identified with all the Fortune 500 companies, those companies that score well and not so well on disclosure on their diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And so we are working with 3 companies in particular and engaging with them, and we filed shareholder resolutions asking them to do a report to improve their transparency around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Every company put out a Black Lives Matter statement. We want to see that followed up with action, and that's what we want from the companies that we invest in. And we will be encouraging these companies to be transparent about those efforts. So, a lot of companies will say that they're doing internal work, but as investors, and they are publicly traded companies, we think we have a right to ask them to disclose not only their statistics of who gets promoted, who gets hired in the executive suite, also their board representation, but also the actions that they're taking. So that's, Matt, yeah, next slide, thank you. And then on the environmental justice and environmental space, we are working with Climate Action 100. It's a $47 trillion association that's brought together investors around the world, demanding action on greenhouse gas emissions. And they're looking at not only what are the companies doing, but they're also looking at their lobbying efforts. Often, companies will set goals, and yet they'll lobby through the chamber and other places for business as usual. It's incredible to see the collaboration that's come together on this. We're specifically leading with a group called International Paper, which is based in Memphis, Tennessee, and encouraging them to do a even more courageous work around controlling their greenhouse gas emissions. And really, this is in alignment with the Paris Accord, and that we would, as a global community, restrain greenhouse gas emissions so that we can keep the climate change below 2 degrees Celsius by 2050. And it's going to take everybody doing their part. We're also working closely with ICCR, the Interfaith Center for Corporate Responsibility, and we have from the beginning. In fact, this coming year, ICCR is celebrating their 50th anniversary, and the UCC and UCF was one of the founding members of that organization. So we're really excited to celebrate with ICCR in this upcoming year. Next slide. I'll hand it back to you, Matt.
Sure. Thanks, Matthew. Appreciate it. And the good work that we're doing within the portfolio, particularly around some of the diversity metrics. I read just this week that Tesla, which we would think about being a fairly progressive company in many ways, just came out with their first formal diversity report this week. So a lot of work remains to be done, but thank you for your efforts in that. Great presentation. So in summary, really where the rubber hits the road for United Church Funds is that we want to be in a position to serve your conference and to serve the churches that are within your conference, to make sure that these best practices that we've talked about and the resources and tools that United Church Funds provides has an opportunity to trickle their way down to those investment committees and church councils, to be able to allow them to know that these resources are even available to them. So the way that we would offer to do that would be this. We'd help your constituent churches and your conference by helping them set their policies up. We have a template for an endowment policy statement that is simple to follow. It comes with a checklist that helps with the customization process, and we use it with dozens of churches a year. We'd be happy to make that available, although to be fair, in the wrong hands, it doesn't do much good, or in untrained hands, it doesn't do much good. So we want to make that a partnership with our staff at United Church Funds. If there are churches that you hear about throughout your conference that are thinking about maybe pulling money out of their endowment to do something else, we want to really focus on educating them about the long-term implications of that. We want to help you promote planned giving. This is a great opportunity. We're in this sort of demographically, we're in a time where planned giving makes a lot of sense to folks. And we want to be able to allow them the opportunity and resources to support the conference, support churches through legacy giving. And then lastly, we hope that your conference and all the churches that have assets to invest really think about the ways they are investing and how they're making an impact. And at United Church Funds, we certainly have the ability to help them with that. And so with that, I'm going to stop my screen share, and we'll kind of pull back here to all of our participants on the call. And I'd love to entertain any questions that you have, any thoughts that you might have. And as you throw those questions to us, we see your names, but for the benefit of all on the call, why don't you tell us in the capacity in which you serve in the United Church of Christ, and maybe where you're calling in from tonight. So any questions, feel free to fire away. We'll be happy to answer.
Matt, this is David Ackerman from the Penn West Conference, and I have a couple of questions for you. We have a description and objective statement and a statement of investment policy for our endowment committee. But we are working on amending those. We have a committee that's at work already on trying to consolidate them into a single endowment policy. But given the slides that you shared and the fact that you have these templates and that you would be willing to, would you be willing to work with us on these, on this sort of thing?
Yeah, Stacy and I would love to work with Penn West, and obviously we appreciate the relationship that we already have with you, and these are good opportunities, David. Like we've been working with your conference for a while. We want to make sure that that these resources are available. We don't want them to be the best kept secret in the UCC. So we want to get that out, and reach out to Stacy or I, and we'd be happy to team up and help your conference in any ways we can.
Well, that's great. Your timing on raising those is perfect because of these conversations that we've just been having this past month about our endowment policy. And also the points about draws that you made were really thought-provoking too. And I think I may want to circle back with you on those at another time as well. So thank you, Matt, for all that you do.
Sure. You bet.
So this is Jenny Brown Daniel. I'm conference minister for Missouri Mid-South Conference, and I just wanted to give a plug for the work that Matt did with our conference in the endowments. What we were finding, which I think is the case in many of our churches and conferences, is churches that would close would give money for, and then narrow it very specifically. And then we had all of these closed churches for, theological education scholarships, or, and so it became kind of this memorial plaque of, former churches. And so what Matt helped us do is this legacy fund in our endowment, so that in the future, when churches close in our conference, we identified 5 topics of ministry, and they are youth and outdoor ministry, theological education, social justice, general operating fund, and church renewal, church start. And so when churches are closing, we can have this conversation with them and invite them to consider, they can do a percentage, but a part of what that also does is it encourages the churches not to restrict the money. One of our churches that closed gave $500,000 to church starts in Kansas City. And so that really limits us. So I would encourage churches and conferences to consider that, because it really cleaned up our endowments from that perspective. And it's great for future conversations with churches.
Thanks, Jenny. I had fun working with the Missouri Mid-South Conference. It was a good opportunity for us to dig in and really see how this would play at the conference level. Frankly, we had done the similar work at the church level, but yeah, it was great. And I think it's paid dividends. And I think the key word that you used there, Jenny, is when churches close, we have to have a plan. And we don't want to think about it that way. And we don't want to be too negative, but when churches close, specifically at the conference level, we need to have a plan. We need to have those policies in place. And we also need to have almost like a marketing theme for those folks to be able to direct them to put their dollars where they will be used the most effectively for the remaining folks in the conference. I don't think anybody would have a problem with that. It's just a matter of how we phrase it and how we put it into the policy. And like I said, I'd be happy to others that are interested in that sort of what we refer to, or at least what I refer to as the bucket strategy. We'd be happy to have further conversations about that. Thanks, Jenny. Good to see you.
Matt, there's another follow-up question from David on the PowerPoint presentation and how we can share that.
Sure. So all the resources today. So we're recording this call. And by the way, I want to thank our marketing guru at United Church Funds, Debbie Weeble. She's behind the scenes handling all the hosting and recording. So Debbie, thank you very much for all of your work and staying up late to do this with us as well. We're going to record. We have this all recorded, and then we'll also make the PDF available to you all. So we'll have a record of who's on this call, and we'll be happy to send this out to you as a resource. Absolutely. Okay. Well, if there are any additional questions, I see a couple in the yes. Yeah, Debbie's in the chat. we're going to upload it to the app, and then we'll send it to you directly to at least the PDF by email.
Can,
It's
can I ask? Can
yeah.
I ask one question? And this is for all of y'all, Charles and everyone. Y'all mentioned earlier kind of the anticipation of 2021 and the decline in giving. You know, I think we as conference ministers are aware in terms of OCWM potentially is going to be in decline. Is there anything that you are strategically planning for 2021 in terms of either from the investment perspective or other areas that as we finish up the pandemic, hopefully, and that decrease in financial giving potentially, is there anything that y'all are doing strategically in that area to support our churches and conferences?
So Ginny, that's probably a whole nother session or workshop. That's a great topic, and everyone's asking that. Let me say this. I know the financial ministries and Optic are actually having that kind of conversation, and we are doing some thought about that as we work with some of the Chisholm agencies. But here's what I want to say. For the immediate, you might want to think about end of year. You know, a lot of folks look at their financials, they look at their tax situation. You probably want to remind people about the qualified charitable distribution. You probably want to have people be thinking about gifts that they can make, especially major gifts, because they can deduct 100% if they do that filing. I mean, if they itemize. So obviously, you know, there's a whole lot there, and you just want to encourage people to talk to their financial planners or whoever gives them advice on their finances to think about what's the best for them as we come to end of year, because again, for some people, this may be a grand time to make a major gift. You know, probably this may not happen in 2021. We'll just have to see what happens, you know, with the new administration and with Congress. So anyway, that's the place to start, and then we'll think about, you know, strategically. I think, you know, there probably will be things coming out of the Office of Philanthropy, because I know we're having those kinds of conversations already. And there's obviously a lot of nonprofits are talking, you know, about that issue, because the one question a lot of people are asking is this a time to do a capital campaign? Is this a time to be doing even an annual campaign? And, you know, I was just reading something the other day about how they're saying, no, not just is it the time, you should be doing 2 of them. So anyway, there's a whole lot of thoughts about that going on. It's too bad we just don't have time to take that here. You know, I know we're running out of time. I just want to say this. We are so sorry that we can't meet in person. I mean, this has been wonderful, I know, to be able to have this way of doing things. But still, that you would join us even at this late day, you know, late part of the day. I just want to mention Edith Guffey's with us, and Edith is the chair of our board of directors, and we're so grateful for her leadership, especially in this time as we've been going through this pandemic. And it's affected everybody, including us at UCF. In fact, that last slide, there were a bunch of doors there you saw. I almost didn't recognize it. Those are the doors of our office. We haven't been there in so long, I forgot what that looked like. But I do want to say this. Had we met in person, we would have offered each of you a glass of wine or 2. And it just crushes me that we can't do that. So it is my promise, when we can meet again, a free ticket to a glass of wine. All right, well, thanks so much. Matt, any last words here?
No, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Charles, for that. I'm also grateful for my colleagues for on the East Coast for being with us. And as I look around this call, I see folks West Coast, East Coast, Midwest. And it reminds me that, you know, the diversity of our clients at United Church Funds, and we're appreciative of you all. So thank you very much. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your time at AM 21. We'll make these materials available. And if you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to help. Have a great night.
Good night.
All right.